April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above the coast of France. The air at this altitude is thin, cold, and lethal, inside the pressurized cockpit of a Focke-Wulf 190A5. The only sound is the rhythmic labor of the BMW radial engine and the hiss of oxygen. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermiken, the veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, adjusts his flight goggles and looks down through the crystal-clear canopy. Below him, against the tapestry of occupied Europe, a formation of enemy fighters is struggling to climb. He smiles behind his mask. To a German pilot, raised on the aesthetic purity of the Messerschmitt 109 and the aggressive geometry of the Focke-Wulf. The shapes rising from the haze look absurd. They are corpulent. They are barrel-shaped fuselages married to wings that appear mathematically insufficient for their bulk. They do not slice the air. They seem to displace it by brute force. Hermiken presses his throat microphone. The Yanks have sent us flying milk bottles. Laughter crackles over the radio frequency. The wolves of the Luftwaffe, circling in the high sun, watch the heavy silhouettes lumber upward. 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group. 7 tons of metal hanging on a single propeller. To the German elite, these machines are not threats, they are targets. Fat, slow, comical. What Hermiken does not know, what none of the men circling in the high-altitude trap can possibly imagine, is that the laughter of April 1943 marks the precise moment the air war was lost. They are looking at a shape they do not understand. They see obesity where there is armor. They see clumsiness where there is kinetic energy. And they do not yet know the sound that will come to define the death of the Luftwaffe. The sound of 8 synchronized .50 caliber Browning machine guns. Within 18 months, the milk bottles will not be objects of derision. They will be the architects of a silence that blankets Germany. The mathematics of destruction are already loaded in those wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition. A combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute. This is the story of a technological paradox. How a 7-ton dinosaur defeated the most agile predators in history. How industrial logic crushed tactical brilliance. And how the laughter of the Luftwaffe turned, degree by degree, into terror. The origin of this monster lay in a panic. June 1940, the Wehrmacht was sweeping across France, and the specter of German air superiority terrified the United States Army Air Corps. They needed an interceptor. They needed it to fly higher than the Germans, dive faster than the laws of aerodynamics seemed to allow, and carry enough firepower to disintegrate a bomber. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born chief designer at Republic Aviation, looked at the requirements and realized that a conventional fighter could not meet them. To dominate the stratosphere, the aircraft needed a turbo supercharger. But the ducting required for such a system was massive. It could not be bolted onto a fuselage. The fuselage had to be built around it. Kartveli made a decision that would define American airpower. He did not build a plane with a gun. He built a gun platform with an engine. It will be a dinosaur, he told his team, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. When the XP-47B prototype first took to the sky in May 1941, it shocked the test pilots. It weighed nearly 10,000 pounds empty, 65% heavier than the aircraft it replaced. It dwarfed the British Spitfire. It made the German Bf-109 look like a toy. Walking up to it on the tarmac, pilots felt less like aviators and more like heavy machinery operators. The question was always the same: does this thing actually fly? It flew, but it demanded a price. The heart of the beast was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, a radial engine so large a man could curl up inside the cowling. This engine did not just pull the aircraft, it hurled it through the sky. However, the training grounds of America were soon littered with the wreckage of those who failed to respect the weight. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56th Fighter Group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 killed more Americans in Connecticut than the Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing. It torque-rolled on takeoff if the throttle was jammed forward too fast. And in a dive, it accelerated with such terrifying enthusiasm that pilots encountered a new phenomenon: compressibility. Shock waves formed on the wings. Controls froze. The stick became as immovable as a stone pillar. Major Hubert, Hub, Zemke, commanding the 56th, initially despised the machine. It was a widow-maker. A brick. But those who survived the learning curve began to notice something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, an Oklahoma farm boy, strapped himself into the cockpit for the first time and felt the vibration of 2,000 horses. He described it as strapping himself to a locomotive. You didn't fly the Thunderbolt, you aimed it. When they arrived in England, the Royal Air Force was polite but skeptical. British pilots, accustomed to the balletic grace of the Spitfire, walked around the massive American fighter and offered dry jokes. They suggested the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap your harness and run around the cockpit. But the combat debut in April 1943 seemed to confirm the German prejudice. The Thunderbolt could not turn with the Focke-Wulf. It could not climb with the Messerschmitt. At medium altitudes, it was sluggish. The Luftwaffe pilots, veterans of Poland, France, and the Battle of Britain, quickly diagnosed the victim. They called them Indiana fat targets. They attacked from below, exploiting the Thunderbolt's poor climb rate. They forced turning fights where agility trumped horsepower. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller, commanding JG-26, reported to his superiors that the new American fighter was meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, he wrote. It turns like a freight train. In the first month, the Americans lost 14 aircraft. The Germans lost 3. The logic of the air war seemed intact. The agile sword defeats the heavy hammer. But beneath the statistics, an anomaly was emerging, a strange data point that German intelligence failed to process. The P-47s that were shot down took a long time to die. On May 4, a Thunderbolt returned to base with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. By the laws of physics and metallurgy known to the Luftwaffe, that aircraft should have been a smoking crater in France. Instead, it was taxiing on an English runway. The air-cooled radial engine had no fragile radiator to puncture. A liquid-cooled Messerschmitt engine would seize seconds after a coolant leak. The R-2800 Double Wasp could have a cylinder blown off and keep churning. And then there were the guns. The convergence zone. German fighters carried cannons with limited ammunition, 60 to 100 rounds per gun. They had to be precise. The Americans carried 3,400 rounds. They could fire for 30 seconds. When 8 streams of .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds converged on a single point in space, they did not just puncture metal. They created a disintegration field. The event that shattered the German illusion occurred on June 26, 1943, over Forges-les-Eaux, France. Robert S. Johnson, the Oklahoma farm boy, was flying tail-end Charlie in a formation of 48 Thunderbolts. They were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s. It was a textbook ambush. Johnson was caught in the crossfire. In the span of 3 seconds, 21 20mm cannon shells detonated against his aircraft. The sound was like a jackhammer inside a steel drum. His canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed the cockpit, blinding him. The engine cowling was torn away. Fire blossomed behind the instrument panel. Shrapnel tore into his nose and hands. By all rights, Robert Johnson was a dead man flying a coffin. He tried to bail out. The canopy was welded shut by a shell impact. Trapped at 27,000 feet. Wounded, blind, in a burning aircraft. But the aircraft did not fall. The engine, shaking violently, continued to turn. Johnson leveled the wings. He pointed the nose toward England. And then, the nightmare deepened. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, piloted by an ace from JG-26, spotted the cripple. He pulled in behind Johnson. He slowed down. He was going to execute the coup de grace. The German pilot opened fire with everything he had. 4 20mm cannons, 2 machine guns. Johnson huddled behind the armor plate, a slab of steel 3/8 of an inch thick, and waited for the end. The Thunderbolt shuddered under the impacts. Rudder cables snapped. The fuselage skin was flayed open. But the armor held. The German ran out of cannon ammunition. He repositioned. He fired his machine guns until they clicked dry. Still, the Thunderbolt flew. The German pilot pulled alongside. Johnson wiped the oil from his windscreen and looked out. He saw the German clearly. A young man, blonde. His expression was not one of triumph. It was a look of profound confusion. Perhaps even fear. He had emptied an entire magazine into this machine, and it refused to die. The German shook his head, rocked his wings in a salute that was half respect and half disbelief, and peeled away. Johnson landed at Manston. The crew chief stopped counting the bullet holes when he reached 200. A cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. 3 of the 4 main structural beams of the fuselage were severed. The aircraft was scrap metal, but the pilot was alive. The report of that survival filtered back to Germany. It whispered through the mess halls of the Luftwaffe. They do not die. You can shoot them, burn them, break them, and they still come home. By July 1943, the Americans stopped flying the P-47 like a Spitfire. Hub Zemke and the 56th Fighter Group unlocked the physics of the heavy fighter. The rule became absolute: never turn. Never slow down. Go high. At 30,000 feet, the turbo supercharger gave the P-47 an engine power that the Germans could not match. From that altitude, the Thunderbolt became a kinetic weapon. Pilots called it the turkey shoot. The tactic was boom and zoom. A P-47 rolling into a dive from the stratosphere could reach 550 miles per hour. It broke the sound barrier in a vertical plunge. No German fighter could catch it. If a Messerschmitt tried to follow that dive, its wings would rip off. The Americans would drop from the sun, unleash a 2-second burst of wall-to-wall lead, and use the tremendous momentum to zoom back up to safety. Gravity was no longer an enemy, it was a battery. And the P-47 stored more energy than anything else in the sky. On August 17, 1943, during the raid on Schweinfurt, the lethality of this new doctrine was proven. Major David Schilling led his squadron against a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyers, heavy twin-engine fighters designed to kill bombers. Schilling's flight dropped like hammers from heaven. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a German gunner, watched them come. He later described the experience. The American fighters didn't wobble. They didn't correct. They just grew larger. Schilling fired. The Messerschmitt ahead of Roth didn't just crash. It disassembled. The stream of .50 caliber bullets, traveling at 2,900 feet per second, sawed the German plane in half. Wings separated. The tail section vanished. In less than 60 seconds, 8 German heavy fighters were erased from the order of battle. This was not dogfighting. This was industrial execution. The Luftwaffe was losing the technological edge. Their engines, reliant on mechanical superchargers, gasped for air above 25,000 feet. The P-47 breathed easy at 35,000. On October 8, Oberstleutnant Hans Philipp, the commander of Jagdgeschwader 1, a man with 206 victories, a national hero, engaged a flight of Thunderbolts. He was fighting at 28,000 feet. His engine was sluggish. The Americans were at peak power. Robert Johnson, the man who couldn't be killed in June, was there. He fired at 300 yards. The combat report was clinical. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. Philipp, the master of the Eastern Front, the untouchable ace, was gone. His death signaled a terrifying reality to Berlin. If Hans Philipp couldn't survive against these machines, who could? Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring demanded an investigation. The report that landed on his desk in November 1943 was a document of despair. It detailed the armor plate, the bulletproof glass, the dive speed, but in early 1944, the Americans introduced an upgrade that ended the debate entirely. The paddle blade propeller, 13 feet in diameter. The blades were immense, broad oars that bit into the thin air with savage efficiency. Suddenly, the pregnant cow could climb. The climb rate jumped from 2,200 feet per minute to 3,000. The acceleration was violent. Hauptmann Heinz Noack of JG-11 wrote in his diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover when we tried to disengage. They followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke. And with the paddle blades came the sound. The tips of the massive propeller broke the sound barrier even in level flight. It created a deep, resonant roar that could be heard miles away. The German infantry called it Donnerschlag, thunderclap, a sound that vibrated in the chest." As the P-51 Mustang arrived to take over the high-altitude escort duties, the Thunderbolt found its true, terrifying calling. It went down to the deck. It became the Jagbomber. The ruggedness that saved Robert Johnson's life now made the P-47 the most effective ground attack aircraft of the war. It could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs, a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets, a single-engine fighter carrying the payload of a medium bomber. April 1944, France. The preparations for invasion. The P-47s began a systematic dismantling of the German infrastructure. They didn't just hunt planes, they hunted trains. They hunted trucks. They hunted shadows. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment, watched his transport column disappear in a flash of light. They came in so low you could see the pilots' faces. He recalled, "The sound was terrifying. Then the hammer of those machine guns. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological impact was total. German troops were afraid to move in daylight. They called it Jabbo fever. Symptoms included sweating, shaking, and an uncontrollable urge to dive into a ditch at the sound of a distant engine." The P-47 forced the Wehrmacht to become a nocturnal army. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The sky over Normandy was a solid ceiling of aluminum. 500 P-47s patrolled the beaches. They were stacked from the waves to the stratosphere. Wolfgang Fischer of JG-2 tried to break through. You couldn't climb over them. You couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. Of the 12 fighters in his group, only Fischer returned. In the month of June alone, the 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed staggering numbers. 651 locomotives, 3,000 trucks, 500 tanks. The industrial might of the Ruhr Valley was being disassembled, bolt by bolt, on the roads of France. The Germans tried to adapt. They developed jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Me 262. Twin-jet engines, 540 miles per hour. It should have been untouchable. But the Thunderbolt pilots found a way. They used gravity. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer spotted a jet. He rolled his P-47 upside down and dove. The heavy airframe accelerated past 500 miles per hour, shuddering on the edge of disintegration. He caught the jet. He fired. The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. Even the future could not outrun the avalanche of lead. By 1945, the specialized P-47M, boosted by water methanol injection, was chasing V-1 flying bombs and running down jets in level flight. The flying milk bottle had become the fastest piston engine fighter in the theater. The end came not with a bang, but with a statistic. January 1, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's last, desperate gamble. 900 German fighters launched a surprise attack on Allied airfields. At the Y-34 airfield near Metz, they destroyed 22 Thunderbolts parked on the ground. A captured German pilot, arrogant, pointed to the burning wreckage. "What do you think of that?" he sneered. Major George Brooking, of the 365th Fighter Group, didn't blink. He pointed to the engineering trucks already clearing the debris. "By tomorrow," Brooking said, "we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German's smile vanished. Within 48 hours, the flight line was full of factory-fresh P-47s. The Germans had lost 200 pilots they could never replace. The Americans had lost aluminum they could replace in an hour. Republic Aviation was building one Thunderbolt every single hour. Farmingdale, New York, Evansville, Indiana, factories built on farmland, staffed by women who had never held a rivet gun before 1942. They built 15,683 Thunderbolts. They produced ammunition by the millions of rounds. 30 million rounds a month from a single plant. The P-47 was more than a plane, it was the physical manifestation of an economic theory. Abundance, excess, overwhelming force. We lose 10, we build 20, you lose 1, it is gone forever. The final tally was absolute. In Europe, P-47s destroyed 3,700 aircraft in the air, 3,300 on the ground, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars. The 9th Air Force fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. But the numbers pale against the human reality. By May 1945, the Luftwaffe fighter arm effectively ceased to exist. The men who had laughed in 1943 were dead. Adolf Galland, the general of fighters, the man who had led the Luftwaffe in its glory days, sat in a captured P-47 after the war. He ran his hand over the controls. He looked at the space, the comfort, the sheer solidity of the machine. "We made a terrible mistake," he admitted. "We saw this big heavy fighter and laughed. We said they built a bomber and called it a fighter. But they understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win." He paused. "Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano. Because of the music they played. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it." The P-47 Thunderbolt was never the prettiest aircraft. It was not the most agile. It was not the most glamorous. But it was the most honest. It was a machine built on the premise that war is not a sport. War is a collision of industries. The Germans built Ferraris to fight a demolition derby. The Americans built a bulldozer that moved at 500 miles per hour. In the museum at Dayton, Ohio, there is a display case. It holds a strip of gun camera film. It shows a Focke-Wulf 190, the pride of German engineering, twisting in the air. Then, the tracers converge, and the Focke-Wulf ceases to be an airplane. It becomes a cloud of debris. Below the film is a quote from a German prisoner of war. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn. They just pointed those guns at you. And you ceased to exist." The laughter died with their comrades. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.